Hey, welcome back to Gronsky Books. And let me tell you, it feels good to be back. It's been about a month since I uploaded my last video, and it's been a couple of months since I've been uploading on a regular schedule. I took a hiatus, some planned time off, while I moved into this new house. Now, when I moved into this house, the first thing I did was put up this bookshelf, of course. But I'm not completely unpacked, and things are not arranged in this house the way that I would like them to be. It's going to take a few more months before I'm really settled in here, but I didn't want to wait any longer to start getting some more videos out. So today is a Friday, and so going forward, expect to start seeing videos every Friday on this channel again. So I just wanted to put out a quick video today, talk to you about some of the books that I've been reading while I was on my hiatus, and let you know that the channel is back online. Now, the first book on my list is Wandering Souls by Cecile Pinn. Now, Wandering Souls is a short book, and I think probably deliberately draped in obscurity. The novel starts off told from the perspective of a child as the family flees Vietnam during the war. But what phase during the war? What part of Vietnam? And what are the political affiliations of the family? All of this is intentionally draped in obscurity because that's not really what matters here. But obscuring these details really only serves to highlight what's truly important here, and that's the refugee status of these children as they aim to start a new life for themselves. A life completely lacking in agency. Now, Wandering Souls, I think, is only about 240 pages long, and for all of its brevity, it still manages to span several decades and encapsulates lives that are wholly alien to me. So for all that, I found value in this novel, but to be honest, I think I would have preferred a work of nonfiction to this author's attempt at capturing my imagination with all this prosy fiction. So it's an honest and heartfelt book, and it's worth reading, and it's probably in talks for the Pulitzer Prize this year. But as a novel, this one kind of missed me. I found myself sort of respecting it more than liking it. You ever read a book like that? You know what I mean? Okay, now for this next book, I've got to say, for a minute there, I was considering this secret reading project where I was going to read a bunch of these really obscure, sort of forgotten books that I found at the thrift store, and then like bring them all together and do like a review video for them where I just sort of like make fun of the books and I kind of laugh at their silly plots, and I still might do that. I honestly like that idea. So I'm going to kind of keep this one short because this book kind of falls into that category of the forgotten, laughable book. And that is Night Flyer by Christopher Fahey. So this book was published in 1982, and so far has easily been the worst book that I've read in 2023. So at its heart, this book is about bullies, and nobody likes bullies. But when the bullied turns into an unrepentant supernatural murderer, he's now the supervillain of the novel, and I can't get behind him anymore. You just lost your connection with your readers when you turn your protagonist into the antagonist. Now, I'm pretty sure Christopher Fahey was very well aware that his protagonist was Breaking Bad right from the beginning, and that his readers probably weren't going to stick with his protagonist all the way through to the end. I mean, hopefully that was the idea, that we were going to abandon him. But I don't think that's much of a recipe for success for a good novel, that that your readers jump ship halfway through the book. It doesn't really bode well for a page-turning thriller. You know what I mean? And for a creative decision, I think Fahey sort of set himself up for failure on that one. This actually brings me to a quick announcement that I want to make. Next week, I'm going to be releasing a video that I've been working on for some time now about bad books that I've read in the last couple of years and the lessons that I've learned from them as a writer. What I've done is I've made a list of these books and I've analyzed their faults, and I'm going through them sort of systematically, and I want to talk about them with you and kind of share with you as a reader and as a writer, what have I learned from reading bad books. I think it'll be fun to talk about what I see as these authors' sort of critical mistakes. So be on the lookout for that probably next week. All right, for the next book, we've got All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. Now, I'm very late to this party. Anthony Doerr published All the Light We Cannot See in 2014 and won a ton of awards. It was a finalist for the National Book Award. And like, I don't know, what can I even say about this book that hasn't already been said and written about like a million times already? This is one of those books that spent years and years floating around on my TBR. I had no business putting it off this long. So a couple of months ago, just as I was starting to pack up my old house, my sister Megan called me up and she was just ranting about this book, how much she loved it, and she was positive that I too was going to love this book. And you know how when some people recommend a book to you and you just basically just cross it off the list because they have horrible recommendations and they never know what they're talking about. And if they're going to recommend it, well, it's not going to be worth your time, right? And then there's other people who get you so well. They know you so well that anything that they recommend, you know, is going to be dead on right. Well, that's my sister Megan. And everything she's ever recommended to me has been a perfect recommendation. So whenever she recommends something to me, I drop everything and I read it right away. And so she calls me just ranting and raving about this book, about how much she loved it, and she's positive I was going to love it as well. So it's like, yeah, this has been on my list for like 9 years now. Like, I really need to get to it. And I finally read it, and I was blown away. I loved the book, absolutely loved it. Wish I'd have read it when it first came out. I don't know. I don't know what to actually say about this book. It's, if you don't know anything about it, it's World War II. It's told from the perspective of a couple of children from different backgrounds. It's very heartfelt, very, it's just like, it's so human. It's so like, the prose is immediate. The characters are desperate, but still uplifting at the same time. It's a remarkable book, and it deserves all the awards it got. I particularly liked reading about young Werner's radio operations. I was a radio operator in the United States Air Force for a lot of years, and so I kind of identified with that. I thought that was kind of a cool thing to read about, so that appealed to me too. Anyway, highly recommend All the Light We Cannot See if you haven't read it yet. I still need to read Cloud Cuckoo Land. That's on my TBR, and I'm not going to let 9 years pass before I get to this one. So hopefully sometime in 2024, I'll get to this book. All right, the next book is Matilda by Roald Dahl. Now, I've never seen the 1996 film adaptation or 2022's musical adaptation of Matilda. And I've never read the book either. But on a slow shift at the library one day, I just picked it up off the shelf and I started kind of flipping through it, and I got carried away, and I just ended up reading more and more, and I ended up checking the book out and bringing it home, and I read the whole thing that night. And I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed this little book. What really surprised me is that I had no idea this book was about surviving abuse, about children suffering abuse, and about the lifelong effects that abusers have on the abused. That's some pretty heavy stuff for a book that I thought was just about a precocious child who could read ahead of her age group. I thought Matilda was a wonderful story, and I hope that more children and more adults are finding this book as these adaptations make the rounds and get more popular. Next up is The Hobbit. And yes, I just reread The Hobbit for the 5th time last year, and so I read it again this year. This year, I listened to the audiobook. I found the audiobook that Andy Serkis read. And Andy Serkis has this sort of very masterful but overwrought performance, which really suits Tolkien's prose in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I've moved on to the Lord of the Rings audiobook since I finished The Hobbit, and I'm halfway through The Two Towers. So this overwrought performance of Andy Serkis really fits Tolkien's prose, I think, because Tolkien's prose is overwrought. It is. It's definitely overwrought, and since you're paying for my opinion, that's my opinion. But I love it, And I love Andy Serkis's performance, even though he kind of low-key sounds like a supervillain, no matter what voice he's doing. But it's been a lot of fun to listen to. Anyway, yes, that's my opinion, The Hobbit. Moving on. Next book on the list is The Trackers by Charles Frazier. And now this book was probably the biggest disappointment of the year for me. The Trackers is a total nothing of a novel. On the surface, it's about a World War II sniper turned Wyoming rancher who hires a mural artist named Valentine to track down his wayward wife. And so Valentine travels first to Florida, then to California to find his wife. He finds his wife, he brings her home, and that's the end of the book. Below the surface, there is no below the surface. That's it. This is a very surface level book. It's no deeper than that. It's just a story, and it drags on for too long. It's not even that long of a book, but it just feels long. I don't like to describe books as boring. I think that's a lazy way to describe a book. But this book bored the shit out of me. The Travelers is superficial fluff at best, with ill-begotten pretensions at something more. I'm not even sure what Charles Frazier was trying to be exactly, but it didn't work. Actually, I do think I know what he was probably going for, and it reminds me that Cormac McCarthy died in 2023, and Charles Frazier's attempt at the philosophical cowboy novel is not the successor. All right, next up, and this is the last novel on the bunch, it's The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. Now, I originally set out to read this book in 2015 when the Amazon Prime series Man in the High Castle was released. I put a hold on my library's one copy of this book, and it took 4 years for it to show up. and I read it in 2019. But in 2019, I was reading a lot. I was reading way too much. I ended up reading 138 books that year. Most books I've ever read in any 1 year ever. And I wasn't really taking the time to really savor any of them or to really enjoy them or really comprehend what I was reading. So my memory of this book was very cloudy at best. And I've since decided that I'm never going to try to read as many books as I possibly can ever again. For that reason, because I'm not the kind of reader who can sit down and plow through 138 books in a year and remember very many of them very well. I prefer to read a book more slowly so that I comprehend it a little bit better. That's what I need, is to read it a little bit more slowly. And if that means that I read fewer books in total, that's fine, because my overall enjoyment of reading goes up, even if my total number of books comes down. I'm not trying to win YouTube out here. There's people who read 400 books a year. But never mind. I don't really remember the Prime series for Man in the High Castle all that well. I do remember that I didn't like what they did to Joe's character that much. It was too big of a divergence from the novel. But I can't exactly remember why now. I didn't really like the series all that much. I didn't finish it. But upon the reread of the book, there were a number of things that really stood out to me. One of the funnier ones is that I had forgotten, and because this is a Philip K. Dick book, he can't resist putting people on Mars. So I'd forgotten that the Nazis had colonized Mars after World War II in this novel. So that was a little zany. I think they left that out of the series because the series is supposed to be a little bit more rooted in what's possible, I think. So they left out the whole thing about draining the Mediterranean and the whole Africa subplot. I think they took that out of the series too. I don't remember anything about any of that in there. And that's all probably for the best. Those are probably good decisions for the show. But one thing that I was really left with was this, upon the reread, was this sense of wanting more. And there's three specific times in the book where I really wanted more. And I won't go into spoilers in case you haven't read it yet. But and if you have read it, there's a part where Tagomi gets his glimpse, if you remember that part. Julia's final scene and the reveal surrounding Joe. Those three parts of the book, like I found myself really, really wanting a lot more. But I think in showbiz, that's like the ultimate goal, is leave your audience wanting more. And so that Philip K. Dick was successful there. Like, I didn't get filled up and get bored with the book. Like, I wanted more. Like, I wish there was another 400 pages for me to sit down and read through, which gets my imagination just running at the red line. And I think that's probably a really common experience, especially with this book, that the premise was so large that the Axis powers were triumphant in World War II versus the Allies. It's not the first time somebody's supposed this, but like in a science fiction novel of this type, this is like the ultimate example of that. For Philip K. Dick to write like a short novel about something so big, it leaves my imagination just running rampant. So I think after this reread specifically, I'm left pondering two main points, and there's probably more that can be discussed, but this time around I'm thinking about two main things, and one is surrounding the historicity of objects. The indelible marks of significance left behind in objects as history happens around them. For example, a penny carried in a president's pocket has more historicity than a penny carried in every man's pocket. So in the future, an antiques dealer will say, "This penny belonged to FDR," and that penny is now worth more to a collector in the future than just any random penny. But that historicity applies to more than just the objects and the antiques that it's rubbed off into. I think that historicity applies to music and novels and just stories that we tell and people that are involved in things. That all the time these indelible marks of significance are being left behind by history onto other things, and then that can be felt in the future by others. And it's very kind of woo-woo when you think about it like that, but I think that there's something to that concept. Anyway, a second point that Philip K. Dick asks us to consider is whether the gods have or have not abandoned us to a multiverse of infinite possibilities. Almost every character in The Man in the High Castle consults the I Ching for guidance. And I think it was the trade minister Tagomi who theorized that perhaps the gods have, since the end of World War II, have abandoned humanity and are no longer guiding the I Ching, and so everything is random. And if that's true, what are the implications then for fate? How is fate guided if the gods have abandoned you? Does that mean they have free will? Like, it's a very interesting concept that the world is governed by fate, then we're abandoned by the gods who are in charge of fate, and where does that leave us? Does that leave us with free will, or does that leave us with fate gone amok? It's an interesting thought puzzle, and it's just a lot to think about. And so all this is a lot to absorb, even for a second read through, so I'll probably be back to this book a third time in the next 5 years or so. I don't know. So I really liked it. I tend to like Philip K. Dick. Philip K. Dick is a writer of big ideas, and even in his longer books, they're still short, and they're never fully explored, which just leaves me with so much to think about after every one of his books that I've read. So I'm just left thinking about him for months afterwards, but in a good way, which is a lot more than I can say for some of these books on this list that I finish and never want to think about ever again. So I also read a couple of graphic novels during this hiatus. I read Batman: The Long Halloween, and I read the first 4 volumes in the Marvel's Star Wars Darth Vader series. The Darth Vader books are pretty good for the most part. they introduce a character named Dr. Aphra, and she gets a whole spin-off series, which I want to read. But before I read those, I wanted to read kind of the origins of her character in this Darth Vader comic. There are also some other characters in this Darth Vader comic, some droids, some assassin droids. One's called 000, that's basically a mirror, a dark mirror of C-3PO, who's hysterical. It's so funny. Some of the funniest Star Wars writing I've ever read is... But I've also got several other books going on right now that I'm currently reading. I mentioned the Lord of the Rings audiobooks that I'm going through, read by Andy Serkis. I'm also reading Ghost in the Shell for the first time, Razzmatazz by Christopher Moore, Seabiscuit by Laura Hillenbrand, and I'm about to start Marvel's Dark Tower Beginnings Omnibus. These Dark Tower graphic novels have been coming out for years now, but the omnibuses are just now being released in these huge volumes, and I've never read them. So this is going to be a good time for me to jump on to the Dark Tower graphic novels. So I'm going to read those Dark Tower Omnibi, and I'll probably let you know how that's going in future videos. Anyway, I just wanted to let everybody know that the channel is back up and active, and you can start expecting videos every Friday. So until next Friday, read something good.